Welcome to the Jack Westin MCAT podcast with your host, Phil Hawkins.
And Azaii Calderon Muñiz.
Welcome back to another episode of the Jack Westin MCAT podcast. I am your new short-haired host, Phil Hawkins, here with Azaii. I just donated my hair for the 7th time. So I've been doing it pretty much nonstop since I was in college. Felt good to trim and shorten, and man, I've slept so good. I went outside, I'm like, wait a minute, I can feel the sun on my scalp. I didn't even know that was a thing.
That's fantastic. You're looking sharp. Sharp. It works.
I'm trying to figure out what to do with my hair now that it is shorter. I have to do something with it. But so today's episode, this is our 2-year anniversary. That's on top of this. It's a big, we're marking the time passing. And so that's a really exciting thing. We did an episode a little bit ago when we had our 100th episode where students submitted questions to the podcast. And today we are going to continue with some of those questions because so many questions came in, we literally could not answer them all. So there's a bunch of stuff here, and some of them I'm really excited about. And so let's go ahead and just jump straight into the first question. And I'm actually going to read kind of like the whole thing here. So this student emailed in this thing. I really liked the message here. Said, I just joined the Jack Westin family about 4 months ago. It's been amazing. As a person with ADHD, I was scared of starting MCAT prep because I thought I would just have to read tons of books or something similar. But not only did you make it easily approachable, but it's been incredibly fun learning how things connect and how fun facts connect to the lecture. I really appreciate that. I wish I started sooner to have more time enjoying content review rather than being stressed to do full lengths. This is something that, I remember reading this and I'm just like, oh my gosh, this person sees into the core of all the things that I care about. Because I have very strong feelings about education. And I think that there are some big problems in the education industry, and chief among that, learning should be fun, not just because it makes it more enjoyable to do it, but it makes it easier to study more. It makes it easier to learn more if it's entertaining and engaging as you're going through this. So having a student like this that emails in and just kind of recognizing hey, I wish that I had more time to spend doing this stuff because I enjoy doing it. That makes me excited because that's the sort of thing that helps students kind of push harder and engage more. And so it's a super, super interesting thing. I also can kind of resonate with this. Maybe this is why I care so much and why this person and I feel are on the same wavelength, but I also have ADHD. Which I think I may have mentioned once or twice on the podcast. But I was not diagnosed until I was in med school. Although afterwards, telling my friends and family, they're like, oh yeah, of course, you didn't know you had ADHD? And I'm like, no, how did you know? And they're like, well, it was obvious to all of us. And I'm like, okay, well, nobody told me. And so I think that there are some interesting things to talk about there. But I do just kind of want to take a moment, just thank you for that email, because that's the sort of thing that I love hearing about and kind of really resonates with why we do what we do.
Oh, 100%. I mean, that there's something about knowing that you're helping even one person that is very rewarding and fulfilling. And I know we stressed this a lot the last couple of episodes, but this podcast really is about you guys and for you guys. And I know that sometimes the way that we've been oftentimes, the way we've been taught is not only boring, but then because of that, it doesn't stick. And so you're constantly trying to relearn the same things over and over and over again. And that's tough. It's not just a situation where, I'm putting in all this extra effort, but I don't know about you, but it can be pretty low-key demoralizing when you're just I've seen this before. I should know this. Why is it not sticking? And so being able to have a conversation about, okay, how do we stay focused? How do we make things stick? How do we, learn it well the first few times we're exposed to it so that we don't have to put in as much effort when we're relearning right, is a really important conversation to have. And I think it applies a lot to students with varying degrees of ADHD, recognizing that, it's more of a spectrum in that capacity, but also just to folks who maybe either aren't diagnosed and have some similarity, some overlap, people who just find themselves for this particular subject having a harder time focusing, having a harder time engaging.
Yeah. I feel like there are kind of like two components to this. Like one is the edutainment, like entertaining education in the ADHD thing. And I have some strong thoughts on both. But I had a student email me the other day and kind of mentioned that they were watching one of my lectures and they were laughing at like something that was going on, and their significant other came by and said like, "Hey, you're supposed to be studying, not watching videos." And they're like, "No, like I am studying. I'm like watching a lecture here." And they're like, "No, you're not. Like you were laughing." And he's like, "Well, it's just fun and funny." And like that's something that's just like, oh, I love that. Like the idea of like some passerby not knowing if you're watching a comedy or in a lecture. I think that there's something to that. But I do want to like this kind of comment brought up kind of the ADHD stuff. And I wanted to kind of take a minute to talk about this because there are some particularly tricky things with this. And there's a couple of things that I've learned for myself as well to kind of like help me like stay focused, because obviously that's kind of the problem here. And with ADHD is like having trouble kind of like staying focused on the things that you need to be staying focused on, even if they are things that you're not particularly interested in. One is somehow make those entertaining and interesting. But sometimes that's just not possible because like you just need to memorize a bunch of stuff. Or let's say you're in an exam and you're reading through a Cars passage on something that I just don't care about this topic. I'll admit for me personally, there are some topics that I just struggle with. Like I love architecture, like reading about that or reading about anything science or medicine or anything like that. But stuff that's like really politics heavy or economics heavy, I just kind of glaze over because I'm just not interested in those topics. And so I do notice a lot of times that students will struggle on topics that they're just not interested in, especially if they have ADHD, but just in general, it's hard to be engaged with something that you don't find interesting. And so this is where I have this I call it the brick wall analogy. And I think I may have mentioned this before, but I think that this is particularly useful for ADHD. And so like I want to kind of throw out a scenario here. Let's imagine that everyone has like you have to stare at this brick wall for 10 minutes and only think about the brick wall. And the moment you think about anything else, like what's for lunch, right? Like should I get this new video game? I should be studying for the MCAT. Like if you think about anything else, you're going to get struck by lightning and you're dead, right? But you have to think about this wall. And so what you need to do in that case is give yourself a task. Give yourself something that you're looking for. Like I'm trying to count all the dark red bricks, right? Or I'm trying to count the total number of bricks, or I'm trying to see what's the biggest number of dark red bricks that are all connected together versus the light red bricks, and like connecting them. How many different shades of bricks can there be? As long as I'm giving myself tasks, I'm going to be engaged in this. Even if I don't care about the wall, I care about the task, right? And so the reason this is useful is, so for me personally, anytime I was dealing with a passage that I just wasn't as interested in, it became more about the challenge of, can I pull out the more important portions of this? It's like, it doesn't matter what the passage is about. I'm playing a game where I'm trying to find the important things. Like it's like I'm doing a word search or a crossword, right? Like you don't have to be interested in the topic of the word search or the topic of the crossword to be engaged in those things. And so taking that time to kind of like train yourself to be focused on the task, not on just like, I'm reading this passage because I want to understand it. No, I'm reading this passage because I'm trying to find what is the author's opinion? What are the contrasts? What are the arguments, right? Like identifying, is this a new argument or is this a piece of supporting evidence for this, right? And like that's my job, is I'm trying to figure these things out. And all of a sudden it doesn't matter what the passage is about, but it's entertaining, it's engaging, because you've given yourself a task.
Yeah, I like this idea of turning it into a game. One of the things that I think is also really helpful, and this comes more from a CARS perspective, is just how you read. I have students all the time. So, in the free trial session, the kind of course preview, given the size, I'm the one that does the reading out loud, right? And sometimes I have them go read on their own. But every so often someone will be like, oh, like, I like how you're reading. And I'm reading how I have a conversation, right? Like in terms of inflection and things like that. And so I think that's also another component that gets lost in terms of how we stay engaged. Because a lot of times, we had, I don't know about you, but like my professors, a lot of them were not very engaging as professors, or I don't know how they were as people outside of it.
Yeah.
But if you're just constantly listening to things in a very boring way, and this is, how you're learning, then you're going to get bored. If, you're more likely to get distracted, versus if you're listening to something and it sounds like the other person is really engaged, right? And the other person is really passionate, you're naturally going to kind of be drawn into that passion. So then we often we look for that when we're learning, but we don't hold ourselves to that same standard. And so I think tying in with making it a game is letting your personality kind of come through. And that sounds really weird, but it's really important in CARS. Letting your kind of personality come through and being as engaging when you're working through the material as you would be in a conversation with a friend. Because oftentimes, and not always, it's easier to kind of stay present for a conversation with a friend than, for example, someone you're just meeting for the first time and it's like, I don't really know, you're just making small talk somewhere. So that's something else I think that can be really powerful and is very underrated.
Yeah. I think that sort of thing happens in the sciences too, especially in those passages, like the bio ones, that just like, I call it an avalanche of jargon, where it's just like the ligand binds the receptor, which activates and recruits STAT, which phosphorylates itself, which then phosphorylates the receptor, which then phosphorylates STAT3, which then like the two STAT3s kind of form dimers. And then like it's something that is really like, when you're reading it, it's like, oh, it's like Jack, STAT, the ILB receptor, the different things, and just kind of like going through this, like they're all kind of merging together in your head. But taking a moment to just draw it out, right? Like draw out like what's happening here. That task keeps you engaged with trying to understand how those things are related. There's so many students that just start to glaze over as they're going through passages and going through like in any of the sections, right? It's really hard to stay mentally sharp for an hour and a half in any given section. You add onto that fact that like you're doing that really tough bio passage like 5 hours into your exam right after doing Chem Phys and CARS. And it's something that a lot of students struggle with. And so learning to deal with that and learning to engage yourself in that is important. But I also want to like training yourself to be able to go for longer periods of time. There's a lot of people like doing a ton of different research on this, and I don't know personally if there's a lot of conclusive evidence to this, but to me it makes sense that people's attention spans are like generally shorter now than they were 40 years ago. Just because like I remember growing up, and man, I feel old, but without having the internet. Right, let alone like a smartphone. Like growing up in my household, we didn't have the internet until I was like 10. And so like there was not this kind of constant onslaught of like being able to switch and change to different things. And nowadays, right, like I find myself, like I remember thinking like, I'm gonna try to go a week without using my phone for any sort of entertainment purposes. I got so much work to do. I need to just stay buckled down. And like, honestly, like within an hour of doing that, like I was doing something and I had a break. And so I'm just like going to walk upstairs and I like grab my phone and hit a video. I'm like, wait, like I can't, like without even thinking, I'm like, oh, I have to walk upstairs. So I better load up some entertainment because I have a 15-step journey that I have to take. And for some reason, like my brain is just automatically looking for that next stimulus. And so I think that can also be hard for students to like sit down and go for long periods of time, and practice helps along with that. And like taking time to practice doing big chunks of time where you're engaged is important.
Yeah. And I guess I have some experience with that you were talking about, like wanting to grab your phone for a 15-step walk. One of the things that, when I had a dedicated study period that I had to be very honest with myself about was, I'm unwinding supposedly with these like videos and short series while I'm having lunch and whatnot, but I'm not actually giving my mind a rest. And so I think that I'm helping myself, and I'm actually making myself like just that more drained. Because even though we're watching shows, it's not like our brain shuts off, right? And so one thing that I didn't do until later, it took a lot of willpower to do, was uninstall some apps from my phone. So there went the streaming apps. And it was hard because naturally I would go to have lunch and I'd pick up my phone to go watch a show, and the app wasn't there. Right. And so that's something else I think that we can do. And it doesn't mean that you have to uninstall every single app from your phone. Right. Let me be very clear about that. But if you know that you have a tendency to, the moment you have free time, go and do something kind of reflexively, take away one of those things that you do reflexively. Right. It doesn't mean you have to stop everything altogether. But in the process of doing that, you're going to teach yourself, okay, let me find something else. Right. And I think it's important to be honest with ourselves about how we are actually winding down and what that actually does for us. And if that actually helps improve our focus and our attention when we come back or not. Sorry, go ahead.
No, yeah, I agree. I was just thinking, like, as you were saying that, like, I did a lot of similar things when I was prepping. I canceled my Netflix. I canceled, like, all the different apps I had. I even had, like, a TV, and I had, like, a game console. And I told my roommate, I'm like, hey, like, because I know that they liked playing video games. Like, can you just, like, do you just want to take the TV and stuff into your room? Because I know that I'm, like, I either want to play, but even if I'm not playing, if you're in the same room as me and I'm trying to study and I'm like in the dining room and I can see the TV from there, like, I'm gonna be watching you because, like, it's gonna pull me in. And so, like, if you want to do that, like, it's my TV, like, just take it and, like, go into your room, take it into your room, take my game console, like, just for, like, a couple of months here while I'm studying for the MCAT. But I need to remove the ability to be distracted because I know that I don't have the willpower to force myself to, like, sit and, like, study and not be distracted when there's all of these within easy reach.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, we are now in such a technology and electronics demanding world, right? True. And it's really easy, I don't know about you, but even to, like, when you're connecting with other people, to primarily connect via electronics, to primarily connect via, messaging or things like that. Yeah. And one thing that can be really helpful is actually, because you're studying for the MCAT, you're constantly either reading, right? You're on your computer, you're watching videos, you're doing practice questions on the computer, you're studying for school on the computer, you're taking notes in your classes on the computer, right? A lot of people will watch their shows on a computer. And so it's really easy for just our eyes to get really strained. And that in and of itself, I don't know about you, but, like, when my eyes are tired, there is diddly squat that I can focus on and I'm retaining even less. And so actually getting outside can be really helpful. And one way that I think is important for both mental and social rest is maybe spend some time with friends. Like, have something planned, and then you're like, oh, I know I have to get this done before I go meet my friends, and we're gonna have some downtime. So let me see if I can shift my focus. And having someone that can help hold you accountable can also be really helpful. It's not perfect, right? It's not a guaranteed thing, but these are small things that you can do to kind of help yourself stay engaged and remain motivated to study and to kind of, pay a little bit more attention when you're going through. I think something that I have found really helpful over the years are sticky notes. And because if I don't see something yet, I will forget it. Guaranteed. Like, guaranteed. I think this, where, like, I have to write everything down because otherwise it will slip my mind. And I actually have, when there's something that I need to get done, I will put sticky notes around the house around the apartment in multiple places, because if it's really important, I don't want to forget it. And so I might set also an alarm on my phone to do that thing. And I think it's very fair for when students are having, difficulty staying focused, or they know that they have to get something done, but their willpower is a little lower. Seeing constant reminders of it may help a little bit, right? Yeah. But don't do that for everything, because otherwise it gets really overwhelming. But that's the kind of thing where, maybe like I know that I need to review enzymes in the next 2 days, right? But I know I'm going to have quite a bit to do, and I'm not really feeling it right now. So let me see where I can. This is where putting, review enzymes just a couple of times, and then you can just pause, and maybe you pause for 5 minutes, right, before you sit down to watch the show, or before you grab, the food that you're going to be eating, whatever it may be. And I think that can also be a way to hold ourselves accountable, and also give that wiggle room of recognizing that even when we plan things out, the best made plans can still fall short, right, and still fall through. And so it's also important, I think, to give ourselves that kind of flexibility, but not so much that our lack of willpower just takes over, or that our difficulty with staying engaged, staying focused, staying on something takes over.
Yeah. So I have 2 things that I want to say. The first one is like the sticky notes on the wall. Like, I also love those, but like I use them a little bit differently. Like, rather than being like, remember to do something, like I would put just the things that I was trying to learn, like I like put them on the walls. And so like to the point where like I kind of cut out as much distraction as I could, but like I know that I'm going to get pulled in these different directions. If all of a sudden my house is decorated with MCAT stuff, like I walk around and I'm like, I'm distracted by this thing that is glycolysis. And like the whole thing of glycolysis is on my kitchen wall in sticky notes, and like I can see each of the steps and the enzymes and what's going on with that. And I like sticky notes. Of course, specifically, I had like a giant wall of just metabolism. Like this goes to this, goes to this, and that was kind of an interesting flow. I even had different colors for like enzymes, or like the green sticky notes, like the substrates, or like the molecules, or the yellow sticky notes. And then I'd stick a red one anytime ATP was involved somewhere, like going in or coming out. And so just doing that sort of thing of just being like, if you know that you are distractible, which I absolutely am, taking time to study in different ways. And so like, don't just sit and like say, I have to be studying my book and going through this, because I can't do that, right? I can't do that for hours and hours and hours on end. I need to be engaged in different ways, right? And so I'm going to be like making flashcards and then putting up flashcards, and then like I'll do like all of glycolysis, and then I'll like go read, and then I'll go watch a video, and then I'll like do it for like fatty acid metabolism. And now I'm trying to figure out like, wait, how do I get this to work? Because acetyl-CoA is here, but like fatty acid metabolism also goes to acetyl-CoA. And so can I like change the wall so it makes more sense? And like what I'm doing is organizing this in my head, but also like literally physically on the wall. And that like going through that process kind of helps me do that. There are also things like color coding and stuff like that, where anything that was written, like anything that was ever about sympathetic stuff, I would always write in red. Parasympathetic, I would always write in blue. And so I'd find myself at times like trying to remember like, okay, pupil dilation, was that sympathetic or parasympathetic? Then I'm like, it was written in red. I remember it was red, right? And so that's sympathetic. And like, I didn't even really remember the fact, but I remember like seeing it in red. And so as a result, like, you can kind of like learn things anywhere. So that is another big thing for students who are like struggling with like focus and staying engaged, and maybe some students with ADHD, even some students without. I think you can benefit from this, is shaking up the modality. Don't sit and try to study or just rewatch lectures for like 8 hours. And like, that's my Saturday. Like you're not going to get as much out of that as if you did 2 hours of that and 2 hours of something else and 2 hours of something else. Like you'll spend like 6 hours, which is shorter time than the 8 hours you were planning to spend, but you actually learn more in time. And so that, I don't know if you had something about that.
Yeah. I think not even like, I think with modalities is really important, also with topics, because remember that on the MCAT, right, you're going to get your topics in chunks. So it makes sense to study, don't just do, don't spend 4 hours on just chem phys one day and then nothing else, right? Do some chem phys, do some cars. If you're going to maybe, if you have the time for it and you're doing a full day of studying in those, 1.5 hour chunks, you could do chem phys, then cars, maybe some biochem or things like that. And switching topics can also be really helpful. And if you think about it, that in a sense is also, especially when you throw cars into the mix, it's you study for it differently than the sciences. For psych soc, in terms of, learning the content is also a little different. And so the modalities you can use are distinct. I'm a huge fan of review sheets and study guides and making your own, because I think that, and we've talked about passive versus active studying in the past, and that's active. And it's also something that, similar like you were saying, if you color code things, it can be really helpful. I wasn't writing out things in different colors. I highlight, I'll use different color highlighters. But when you go back to review it, then it's also just a little bit more engaging than trying to read someone else's notes, because you didn't have that investment in someone else's notes, right? Whereas you were invested when you were creating your own notes. And so you can think about, okay, how was I thinking about it then? And then how am I thinking about it now? Are there pieces that I'm much more comfortable with? Are there things that I'm a little less comfortable with? And I think we've talked about this before, but in case we haven't, I'm also a big fan of when you're reviewing, review guides, study guides, etc. You don't have to do it sitting down at a desk. Right? Go for a walk and talk through it. Like Molly was saying last week, in terms of just kind of thinking to herself, but can also be done for studying, record yourself. And there's something about hearing yourself talking out loud that can be really powerful. You can, I think we've had people tell us that, they talk to all sorts of things like, stuffed animals and notes on their walls and stuff. But I think also just like quizzing yourself, cover up a part of your study guide and see if you can remember what was on it, right? And I think that because of the ability to use study guides and review sheets in different ways, it makes them a very powerful tool.
Yeah. There's just so much there about this topic. And I'm realizing, like, this student didn't even ask a question about ADHD. And it's just like, oh, there's a lot going on here that we see in kind of struggles. But yeah, I'm with you. Like, getting up, moving around, like, that's why I liked doing the sticky notes on the walls. And I did that when I was studying for the MCAT before. When I got into med school, what I did is I had a place where I actually bought these big 4x8 sheets of melamine, which is something you can write on with dry erase marker. And I got 3 of those and just put them next to each other up on this giant wall. And so I could do giant dry erase drawings to help me understand that, because I needed to be up. I needed to be moving in order to kind of be able to deal with that stuff. And so all of those are things that I think make sense. But I do want to kind of pause for one moment here, because I feel like a lot of what we're doing is talking about how to remove distraction, remove all of these things, keep yourself engaged, keep switching it up, and with the way that you're studying. I also really want to reiterate, and I know that you'll agree with this as well as I, it's important to set aside time for outside of studying.
Yes.
And be very clear, this is a time for me to not study, right? I did not do that well and until later on in my life. And as a result, you start to burn out more. And the time that I was spending studying was not as effective, because my body needed a break from things. And so I just was not effective as I was going through stuff. If I had been okay, I'm going to study for 3 or 4 days, kind of heavy, and then I'm going to take a complete day off where I do nothing, right? I actually would do better than if I studied for 4 days in a row, which I know doesn't make sense. But from a long-term perspective, the MCAT's a marathon. Med school is a marathon. You need to make sure that what you're doing now will work later. So doing whatever you can to make sure that when you're trying to study and when you need to, you are effective at it.
Yeah.
But also making sure that there are times when you're not doing that. And I think is also critically important.
110%. Yeah, it's important to strike that balance, right? And I think both of us have said this to students in the past. Don't negotiate a day off, meaning you should always, every week, have a day off. You should not be studying 7 days a week. And I think a lot of students take that as a license to, oh, that's my catch-up day. It's like, no, that is not a catch-up day. That is a reset day so that you can be fully engaged when you come back. Because otherwise, you're going to always have something to catch up on, right? It's almost, even, like I said before, even with the most made out plans, it's still easy to have small things fall through the cracks or big things. Sometimes life happens.
Yeah.
And so don't take that as a catch-up day. Build that catch-up time into your schedule for when you're going to be studying rather than, setting that aside, and do things that you find fulfilling. So just the other day, I went with a new friend to a lake to paint, and we just sat in front of the lake and we painted. And the rest of that day, before and after, I did nothing on my computer, nothing. And I think I was telling you about this, but I just felt so proud of that because it was like, what? There hasn't been a single day, I would say in months, that I haven't either been studying, working, looking things up for patients, trying to understand, some new topics or that might be relevant to clinic or something like that. That has not happened in months. And I finally took a day where, nope, there was none of that. Not on my phone, not on my computer. And I feel great afterwards. The day after, you're just like, yeah, I'm riding a high.
Yeah.
I can go back and do things, right? And I think that's incredibly important. It kind of goes back to the idea of like, make plans with friends. And for those of us that perhaps are not as inclined to constantly be out and about, make plans with yourself, right? And set aside time to do something that you enjoy, whether that's dancing, yoga. You took the yoga class. Maybe that wasn't a good fit for you, but maybe someone else is listening. They're like, oh, I like some yoga. Right? Maybe less art, maybe more outdoors. So hiking. I know not a lot of New Englanders really like hiking and going out. I hear that all the time as people's hobbies. Maybe you like sports, right? And it would be nice to have other people to play with, right? And that's maybe you start looking for a very chill team or setting something up with friends that you can do. There are just so many possibilities, and I think it's really easy to forget what your hobbies are when you are studying, when you're preparing for the MCAT, when you are doing your applications, and when you first get into med school. And it's really easy to kind of forget who you are outside of all of these things. And so having a day of the week where you get to re-engage that aspect of yourself is helpful for staying engaged. Very quickly, I also want to make a plug. So there are some people that probably have a lot of like excess fidgety energy. We have definitely talked about this. I'm someone that sometimes you will catch me playing with Play-Doh when I'm out, or I usually have something in my hands. Sometimes like those spinny rings, or there's, I don't have it with me right now, but there's one that is like little metal spikes, and it's very sensory. And so actually, my Play-Doh is right here. But if you're someone that finds that you have a lot of excess energy, sometimes that can kind of pull you away from being able to stay focused. And so have something that does not require mental energy that can be a source of release for that energy, recognizing that you won't necessarily have that on test day, right? But when you're first studying, it can be a really great way to kind of, I don't want to say refocus, but it takes away that one extra thing and allows you to focus a bit more. I think I'm not doing a very good job of explaining that.
No, I think that you're right. Like there is this kind of other pressure of like fidgeting, which I think happens with some people. It definitely happens with me. I just fidget sometimes with how I'm doing this. Obviously, there's limits to what you can do on your actual test day, right? Like you're not gonna be able to get up and walk around and like poke people or things like that as they're taking a test. Like obviously there's some stuff that you can't do in those cases. But I do notice like that fidgety energy that I would get often usually meant that like I need to go do something else, right? Like there's something else going in there.
Yeah.
And so this is something I learned when I was younger. Like when I was in high school, I was trying to be fitter. I had more energy for that more than I do now. And so I would jog to school and then jog back. And it was like a 3-mile run. And like the days that I would jog to school, like I was able to learn so much more. And like I actually had teachers comment to me and my parents. He's like, yeah, Phil's been a really awesome student the last like couple of months. He's like, I don't know what it is about spring. And I'm like, it's warm enough for me to run and just kind of get out and like burn off some of that energy. But that sort of Zen thing of just kind of like calm your mind and let your body do stuff, I think that can be really useful. Like yoga and sport kind of go into that, running goes into that. But I also get kind of the same thing now just from like mowing my yard, right? Of just like pushing something back and forth across the yard over and over. And it's simple and it's repetitive and you don't have to think and your mind can just kind of go blank. And so it's almost like meditative as something. So I know some students like still live with parents. Like you might offer like, hey, do you mind if I mow the lawn later this week? And they're going to be like, what is going on with you? I'm like, I'm trying to study for the MCAT and I need to mow the lawn.
I love that.
Yeah.
Really quickly, one thing that I still do, and I don't know I'm going to try and verbally explain this for people that are listening, but you can use your hands like as a way to fidget and also like sensory reground. So one thing that I like to do, and if as you're watching, Phil, you find a better way to explain this, please do so. But basically taking your thumb and your index finger and pressing down on the space, like that space where your joints connect between the two.
Yeah.
And like just kind of going back and forth on both of those. It doesn't take thought, right? Or like something else that I do is I'll just like press on my nails. If anyone, I mean, this you don't require, like it doesn't require, like press-ons or acrylics or anything, but just like if you just take your nails and just rub them on each other and just kind of go back and forth, it's so calming. And so maybe you don't do that really loud on test day, but it's something that you can do like very quietly and is calming and like doesn't require thought. And it's just, there's little things that you can do even in the test room that don't require thought that allow you to get some excess energy out.
Yeah.
Something that I like is that depending, and I think there's slight differences in the test centers, but often you're not, if you are directly next to someone, they have kind of the barriers on the table, but then also you're not seeing because of that. And, you have the screen in front of you. You're not seeing if someone else is like tapping their foot or anything. You have the noise canceling. I strongly recommend people do both if they feel comfortable with it. The foam earplugs and the over-the-ear headphones. If you can do those, it is fantastic compared to just one or the other. But if you're someone that like taps your legs a lot, you don't have to completely stop doing that because it shouldn't disrupt other people since, theoretically you're not wearing like bells on your ankles on test day. But I think it's okay to recognize that like sometimes you just got to do a little bit something to.
I think learning how to do that in a way that is non-intrusive to other people and also is not hugely distracting to yourself, especially if it's something you can do. Like I would like touch my fingertips, just kind of like go back and forth. Like that's something I'll start to do just when I'm thinking about a problem really hard, or I'll start bouncing my leg to the point where I'll have people around me who are like, Phil, what are you thinking? I'm like nothing. And he's like, you're doing your finger thing. Like that means you're lost in thought. So, and I'm like, okay. But yeah, so all of those there's a lot there to this. And this kind of like fidgety, I didn't think we'd talk for so long on this topic.
I think we did an entire episode on this.
I know, we essentially did. So I do want to thank the student who submitted that question because there's a lot to that. And just like the student said, they were scared of starting MCAT prep because they thought they were just going to have to sit and read nonstop. And like, if that's what you're doing, that is probably not healthy. Like in terms of like ways to approach something, mix stuff up, do different things, all the things that we just talked about. I don't know if we could reiterate even if we wanted to. All of those things are things that I think can be really useful for students if they do have ADHD, or if you just are struggling staying engaged in your 4th hour of studying, taking some of those tips and taking advantage of that.
Yeah, we didn't talk about this, but also, I don't think we explicitly talked about this, but chunking your time and having presets amount of time. So the way you can build up to 90 minutes is if right now you can consistently stay active and mentally engaged for 30 minutes, 30 minutes of studying, 2 minutes or 3 or 4 minutes of a break where you do not look at your phone, right? Do something else. Try to get accustomed to not looking at your phone. And then, maybe you do that one of the breaks during the day or during lunch or something like that, but not every single time you're taking a break. So in 30 minutes. Then, after 2 or 3 days, you bump it up to 35 minutes, 40, or you go from 30 to 45 minutes, and then work your way up to 90 minutes so that you can consistently, as long as your schedule allows, of course, study 90-minute intervals at a time. And then that's going to make it easier for you on test day. I don't think we explicitly talked about kind of how to grade up to 90 minutes. But that's something that everyone should be thinking about regardless of how far you are out from test day. Because if you're trying to teach yourself how to stay focused for 90 minutes at a time, starting 2 weeks out from test day, that's not going to be as helpful as if you started that from the very beginning.
Yeah.
Right? It's also going to make your life easier when you get to med school if you can sit down and just knock things out. It will make your life quite a bit actually easier.
That might be a necessity.
It might be a necessity.
Start working on that now. Yeah.
But I think also recognizing which topics and which, like, for example, if you really love biochem, maybe you end the day with that rather than starting the day with that. Because if you know that that's something that's going to pull you in anyway, right? Start with whatever doesn't quite pull you in. And that way, when you get to the end, you're not so just like exhausted that you're doing something. Okay, I'm going a lot of hypotheticals. Let's say that I like biochem. But ChemPhys and I don't get along, which was unfortunately the reality. I'm sorry to say this, Phil.
Yep.
If I had started my day with biochem, right, I would have invested a lot of mental energy in biochem. Then I would have tried to do something that I did not like, that stressed me out when I had less mental capacity. That would not have gone as well. Whereas if you start with what you aren't quite as drawn into, so if I start with organic chemistry, which is where we really did not get along, right, I'm still fresh. And then I can go and do the topics that draw me in a little bit more naturally, and I'm more likely to stay engaged. And because you have that kind of balance and you have to learn who you are as a person and what kind of topics this is the case for, it's a balance of doing that and also like thinking about test day order. But I think it's something to consider, right? Because a lot of times we will work uphill and against ourselves. And sometimes when you start learning a bit more about yourself, you learn to work with yourself instead of against yourself.
Yeah.
And that is huge for the MCAT process for general. Let's say that you're in your junior year and you still have senior year and you're going to be applying during senior year. That's going to be helpful during senior year. That's going to be helpful during the MCAT. That's going to be helpful when you're deciding what to review before clinic the next day, when you have 5 different things to review. I've been going off.
No, I feel like that needs a name of like knock out the stuff that you are least excited about first, right? Like I feel like that's like eat your broccoli, right? Like is what that is. It's like broccoli first, then dessert, right? And going through that, I know most people don't consider reviewing biochem like dessert, but for some people there are certain topics that they're just more comfortable and more interested in, more engaged in. To just kind of like bring this back to the ADHD thing, I think that is a critical thing if you have ADHD, right? Don't start with the stuff that you're interested in and then be like, oh, I still need to be engaged in the stuff that I'm not interested in at the end of the day. Like your willpower is going to be depleted at that point, and it's going to be harder for you.
It's also super easy to hyper-focus when there's a topic that you like genuinely like. Yeah, exactly. And so it's easier to hyper-focus, and you might spend so much more time than you had allotted on that topic.
Or even if you needed to, just because you were engaged in it.
Exactly, right? And not everything that comes up that is related to enzymes is going to be MCAT testable. And so you might go down this crazy rabbit hole because you're finding something really interesting. Next thing you know, you're reading, this is probably a subset of our listeners, very small subset, but now you're reading, literature on some random pathway and you're just like, whoa, like this pathway leads to X, Y, Z and it's related to whatever. Like I said, I recognize that's not the case for most people, but you just want to be mindful of those things. And like you said, I know we've said so much. We turned this into a whole podcast episode. We will find a way to answer more questions.
Yeah. I think we'll address some of these other questions in another episode. But I do think that's important. It's just like learning how to stay focused how to stay engaged, how to not be distracted, how to be healthy as you're going through this kind of like study process. And to be honest, this isn't just something for the MCAT. This is something for like your undergrad classes. If you're in undergrad, this is also something very critically for med school, because as things get harder, this stuff gets more and more important. So I think that's one of the reasons that the MCAT is a really good test, is because you can't tackle this the same way you did undergrad. It forces students to change the way that they're tackling things, which is uncomfortable and difficult for a lot of students, but you're going to have to make that change in med school. So if you can start to develop those skills earlier, and you can kind of wait a little bit longer that way, because a lot of times like students get to med school, they have to develop these skills at the same time as being in med school. And that is terrifying and overwhelming and very difficult. And so being forced to develop those skills a little bit earlier, I know most students don't enjoy it, but it is something that is probably going to make your life better in the long run. I know it is difficult, but going through that makes you better. I don't mean like a better person, but like I promise you, by the time you finish med school and you look back at the MCAT, you're going to say like, the MCAT wasn't so bad, right? And it's not that the MCAT was easy. It's just you've gotten so much better at dealing with amounts of information and processing stuff in ways that are efficient. You've learned how to work with yourself rather than against yourself. That like just because you get better overall, the MCAT didn't get easier. It just your level keeps raising. And I think that's a thing to keep in mind. Like when you're struggling, remember that this is what it feels like to grow, and it's uncomfortable. It's a lot like lifting weights, right? Like your new personal record, right? When you go through this, like it's difficult and it's a lot of work to get to those points, but it's kind of the same thing here. You're growing your ability to study. You're growing your ability to handle huge amounts of information, and in a way that's healthy, hopefully. That's a critical portion of that.
Yes, on healthy, really important. I cannot believe we didn't talk about this. Make sure that you are nourishing yourself properly. If you start off your day with something that is, and this is coming from someone who has a very significant sweet tooth. If you are starting your day off every day with something that is super, super sweet, super, very quick release energy, right? You're not going to last as long. And if all of your, and I say this is someone who loves sweets. If I were to only have fruit and Nutella for breakfast and for lunch every day, it's just not going to be conducive to staying engaged, staying focused, retaining, right? So make sure that you're nourishing yourself well and that you're not having these ginormous meals before you start studying, because if you're, first kind of see how it affects you. But for a lot of people, having a ginormous meal makes you want to take a nap after. Yeah. And so if you plan on studying after lunch and you have a giant meal at lunch, you may not be that interested in studying, right? And you may have a harder time studying right after lunch. And so it's like little things like that we don't often consider, but that are important. The other thing that I cannot believe that we didn't mention that is very important is if you have ADHD and you have not yet done so, and it is something that you're interested in, connect with a psychiatrist. They're the ones that prescribe medications. Generally, it will either be a psychiatrist or your general practitioner if they're comfortable doing so. But find out if medication would be appropriate for you and if that's something that you're interested in. It won't necessarily be appropriate or something of interest to everyone. With some form of ADHD, it also might depend on the severity, right? If it's mild and you can control it without medications versus if it's a lot more severe, and that would be a good addition to kind of your regimen and your game plan. Similarly, ADHD is not the only thing that affects our focus. A lot of the other mental health conditions that you and I have talked about on this podcast still can absolutely affect our concentration. Things like anxiety, things like depression. So if you have perhaps a prior diagnosis of that, and you feel that it's impacting your daily life, or perhaps you haven't been diagnosed but you're concerned, making sure that you talk with someone about it, and making sure that you're targeting things not just from a studying standpoint, but from a more holistic standpoint, because that's another instance where we might be working against ourselves and we have an opportunity to work with ourselves. So all that to say, there's a lot you can do, and it doesn't just stop at, meals and eating healthier and, being active or engaged in ways that are mentally fulfilling, being effective with your studying, connecting with, mental health or general medical professionals to make sure that you're optimizing all different aspects of your life while you're studying for the MCAT. Because the last thing you want to do is put those things to the side and then, either not doing as well as you could have because you didn't address those things, or being incredibly burnt out either during or after the process, or exacerbating other conditions that could have been, you wouldn't have necessarily had that exacerbation if you'd been kind of more proactive about it. There's a lot there, I know, but I was trying to very briefly kind of consider a couple of different things before.
Yeah. And talk to somebody early.
Yes.
Don't wait until the week before your test, or even the month before your test of okay, things have gotten bad. And I can't, I'm in a position where I need to talk to somebody now. Things can take a while, and it's better to talk to somebody early than to wait to see if it gets bad, then I'll talk to a physician and go through that. No, you should talk to work with your physician. Your physicians are supposed to be in your corner. Yes. Everyone knows that physicians are the worst patients. Don't be that person, right? When you are trying to go to med school, be the good patient, the one that actually understands and talks to the doctor. But yeah, so there's a whole lot going on there. I do want to thank that student once again for submitting that question. And I want to just thank you for enjoying the stuff that we do, because that is stuff that we try really hard about in the backgrounds. I think a lot of students, it just felt good to have students say I found your stuff really fun and I wish I could do it for longer and for more time. That's something that yes, we have those conversations. What can we do to make this more interesting? What can we do to make this more engaging for students? And so it's really exciting to see some validation to that. I do want to point out, if students do have other comments or questions, please email us, podcast@jackwestin.com. We love getting feedback and we love answering your guys' questions.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. Our email is open. Please go ahead and reach out to us. We do receive the emails. And so even if you don't receive a response, we have seen it. We actually have some topics queued up based off of the emails that we've received. So be on the lookout for those upcoming episodes.